thank you, Ian, for coming along today to talk to
Yeah.
us in somewhat incredibly and unusual circumstances. I've got a little bit of a beard, and it wasn't in your honour, Ian, although I could have said it was. But no, it was. I'm not going to shave until the end of this coronavirus thing, and then we'll see how long the beard is. I'll take some photographs, and when I do eventually get grandchildren, I've got something to show them when I talk about the summer of 2020.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think we're all getting used to the whole video chat thing now, and yeah. I
yeah,
really
well,
want to thank you for what you're doing with the community. You've really built a really cool little droid community here, and you're kind of becoming the Graham Norton of the droid building world.
yeah, I'm not quite sure there, but yeah, absolutely. No, it's just brilliant. It's just a chance for, I guess, everybody to share a little bit about what they do and show a little bit of an insight into some stuff. When I started to look at these things, what really shocked me was what people were doing in their own backyards and their own garages. Not just creating little models, but actually creating full size replicas. So it's amazing to sort of chat to people, and obviously we've got Ian. Ian's done some incredible builds. Salacious Crumb, an entire Millennium Falcon seating area, full scale speeder bikes, BB-8s, R series, and then of course you are famous for the how do you spell it? Sorry, how do you spell it? How do you
That's a good
say
question. I say Dejarik.
it? Dejarik. Okay. Yeah, so obviously Dejarik and Dejarik Builders Group released a number of files for the table, also working and evolving on the rulebook, dice, and some of the creatures. Overall, quite very, very, very impressive. And as you're saying, Ian, I mean, it's just amazing. The community always amazes me how people sort of just keep contributing to it and sharing things and stretching the envelope of what's actually possible. I'm sure we'll have a full-size rolling sandcrawler at some point. As always, any questions or comments or thoughts, just pop into the feed. We'll answer them as we go along. So we'll start Ian. I mean, you grew up in LA, obviously love Star Wars. Can you remember what your first kind of interaction with the movies was, and why it had such an effect on you, as it obviously has done?
So obviously I'm much younger than the probably a lot of the people in your group. I'm probably 20 years younger, which actually put me in an interesting spot. Yeah, because you guys all watched the movies in '77 and saw them come out and have this sort of nostalgia going with that. I was born in '87, but my dad worked for Frito-Lay, which is owned by PepsiCo. And at the time, when I was 10 years old, they were releasing the special edition movies. And so we got to go to all the premieres for the special edition movies. And as a 10-year-old, I got to see A New Hope and Empire and Return of the Jedi in the theater 1 month apart. And so I had a really similar experience probably to a lot of, the people that got to see it back then. And then when episode 1 came out, I was 12 years old. So like as a 12-year-old, I ate that up, and all the toys were coming out and Burger King and all that. And Star Wars was on my cereal box. And so, I mean, it instantly grabbed me. And I'm the youngest of 3 brothers. And like, I just was the Star Wars one, and that was my obsession. But yeah, I mean, I was really just shoved into it at a young age. So
I don't know if you saw the comment, looking like Ewan McGregor. Apparently, don't know if that's ever been pushed in your direction previously.
Yeah.
Luckily, not Alec Guinness, I guess. So I mean, you probably did just at that second wave then, when you got to see it on the big screen and got to see it in cinemas and whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I remember, just my room was like a shrine to Star Wars. I had shelves and cardboard cutouts and posters everywhere, and it was obnoxious. And
I guess, I mean, growing up in LA as well, you're fairly close to the heart of movie making. and some, pretty amazing people. I think, you mentioned Mike Senna at one point as well. How did you go from watching movies to getting involved in all of that? And was the LA thing quite an immersive way to help you get there?
Yeah. So I, making that transition from like a fan to like really being in it, I can kind of think back to like I had the book visual guide to episode 1 or whatever, and it had all the parts and pieces broken out in that book and like detail shots. And I remember I was in the shower one day and my mom's Gillette razor was like in there. And I remember looking at that and realizing, oh my gosh, that's a communicator. And I like put my towel on and ran out with the razor and like set it up to the book. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a communicator. And I was like totally blown by that. And I started to realize, oh my gosh, these things are like real things. And so we started doing like hardware store lightsabers, and I made a thermal detonator from like 2 door stops, and I was just like in it at that point. And so when I was 17, I bought my first Stormtrooper armor and thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to join the 501. And then I found out you have to be 18 years old. And so I had to wait for that. And then so during that time when I was 17, I would go to like anime conventions in my Stormtrooper armor with like my white tennis shoes and like, not knowing what I needed to be doing. And then at 18, I submitted my application and I got into the 501st. And like now Star Wars was like real life. Like I was with a bunch of other Stormtroopers and there were a bunch of costume characters and there were R2 units rolling around, and it was like, it just blew my mind. And so I really right away started connecting with a lot of the people in my local group, and most of my friend base started becoming, they were Star Wars obsessed people. And so I got invited to R2LA. I think the first R2LA I went to was in 2007. And at that age, it was like so beyond what I thought my capabilities would ever be. And it was so cool to be engrossed in that environment. There were a lot of people involved in the industry. There were a lot of really, really, really talented folk making stuff out of everything. And I mean, this is back before rapid prototyping and stuff like that in a way. So, I mean, it was all very impressive stuff that was a bit over my head. And that got me into thinking, what's next? And that's when I started working on C3PO, which took me a couple years to make. That was Chris Bartlett had his C3PO's Builders Group, and it was a very small group of people. Most people were just kind of collecting parts or putting together full-scale displays and stuff like that. And so when I finished my C3PO, I think at the time I was like one of 4 in the world. And I took that to R2LA and got a great response there. And then I started going out in 3PO for that year. And I got much more engrossed and involved in the droid building at that point.
Yeah. Have you still got the 3PO suit?
No, I had it for 1 year in 2010, which I guess is 10 years ago now. And it was a pretty impressive year. And then I sold the suit at the end of that year. I think I actually sold it to Chris James. He's the guy that does the stealth controller.
Okay, yeah.
And he was going to turn it into an animatronic or something. I really don't know what happened to that suit.
But I guess, I mean, at that time, and being part of the cosplay groups and the builders groups, you've got some pretty interesting adventures. I know you sent across a picture. Is this you with Mark Hamill in the 3PO suit?
Yeah. So that was one where, like I said, there were very few 3POs on the planet at the time, and I got a request handed to me from Chris Bartlett, who at the time was doing a lot of these sort of in-person 3PO events, and this was one he couldn't make, and they put me on a flight to Paris, France, to appear at this Jules Verne Film Festival. With Mark Hamill. It was an anniversary of Empire Strikes Back, and so here I was in Paris, France. They put me in a 5-star hotel. My room was right next to Mark Hamill's, and it was all expenses paid. It was just absolutely absurd.
How
And
old were you then?
yes, gosh, I must have been 20 at that time. Yeah.
Okay, so
And
rock
they
and
flew my
roll.
brother out with me, and so it was just the two of us. We had 3 days in Paris. It was wild, and I got to talk to Mark, and I got his, he signed a few things for me. And at the time, we didn't even know these new movies were coming out, and so no one had really seen Mark Hamill for like 20 years. And I was in the suit, ready to go on stage for the bit they were gonna do, and he was not showing up. He was an hour late. He was out in the street signing autographs for people, and it was like he just signed everything people put in front of him. And so we were an hour late. I was in the suit, totally sweating, going crazy by then. It was just a really, really great experience. And that whole year, really, having 3PO, it was like I was a rock star. It was the coolest thing. I got flown to New York to do this college humor shoot. I was on. There was some Disneyland Builders or Disneyland group that did this thing with Neil Patrick Harris, and one weekend, and it's funny because I'm going to my regular 8 to 5 day job, and then on the weekend I'm like, yeah, in a wedding, or something. It's just totally absurd, And the stormtrooper thing really got me hooked on that, because like my first event I ever did as a stormtrooper, I was on the red carpet with a bunch of other stormtroopers for this gala at like a museum that had all the Star Wars props on display, and they shut down the museum, and they had like Iron Chef Morimoto there cooking for people, and the whole thing was themed as like the cantina, and like I'm like 18 years old, and I'm like, what the heck am I doing? This is the coolest thing in the world. And then the next weekend I'd be in some Hollywood mansion as a stormtrooper for like ESPN, the Spanish version of ESPN, with all these Mexican sports stars or something, and taking pictures with me as a stormtrooper. And so it was just right away, it was like, wow, my life really transformed, when I joined.
You were hooked.
Yeah.
And I guess so. At that time, being 20 to go through and experience all that's quite a blast, isn't it? How long did that last for? Out that kind of, or are you still living the rock and roll lifestyle?
I think that year was probably I practically checked everything off my bucket list. I've been to Celebration a number of times. And that year was the same year I had Stormtrooper, or the C3PO, is when I got to actually interact with George Lucas in the suit. I had this interaction where he pointed at me and said, how long has that guy been in the suit? And someone said an hour, and he's like, Tony wouldn't be in that suit more than 10 minutes. And he points at me and says, you got the job. And like me at that 20-year age, having been like engrossed in Star Wars my life, that was like, okay, I can die now, So, but and so things got a little more like, I got married shortly after that. I sold the suit. I started going a little more low key and focusing on all that. And my wife ended up moving to Delaware. Where we both moved to Delaware for her to go to grad school, and that's when things kind of really settled down for me, and I started kind of taking a more creative approach to the whole thing.
But you never stopped building.
No. Yeah.
So now I guess we'll get on to building now as a bit of a veteran of some remarkable builds. You'll obviously know all the mixed skills around fabricating, electronics, coding, mechanics, a whole sort of bunch, and it's quite daunting. And obviously we've got lots of people that are just starting out. Based on the experience you had, what would you say to those? How would you learn it all? How do you even start? It's crazy.
So, it's really Star Wars has been the inspiration for a lot of my major projects and learning skills, and that whole complex world of just massive amounts of things you can pick from as to where you want to go and what you want to build. And then it wasn't so much rapid prototyping and 3D printing and 3D modeling, so it's a lot more hands-on experience. And I guess that would be sort of what I would push, is that you want to work with as many mediums as you can. Don't just limit yourself to the one kind. working with wood and working with metal and figuring out how to incorporate those into a build that might be fully 3D printed, I think is a good way to go. But it's really finding a project that is so far beyond your skill set and just starting it. Whether you have the ability to do it, and if you don't have the ability to do it, you're going to find out quick. But you're also going to learn from that, and you're going to acquire new tools, both physical and mental, and be able to apply those toward other projects. And people can do most things if they really have the determination and just go at it and take it slow and work at it like a jigsaw puzzle and work at the one piece and not the big picture. I guess that's my advice on learning all these different skills.
And what if you were? I mean, I guess all builders got their superpower, what they're really good at, whether that's painting and finishing, whether it's building, whether it's coding, whether it's electronics. What's your strengths and weaknesses in that sort of world?
That's a good. So I guess, well, I've never really been an artistic type. I did a little bit of sculpting in high school and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I'm terrible at drawing and sketching and stuff like that. But I guess, like I said, is taking a project that's so far beyond my means and just learning how to do the beginning and working my way through the entire thing. And through that, I've gotten a full set of skill set. When I was 13 years old, I was playing video games, and it was Star Wars again. It was Jedi Knight, Dark Forces, and X-Wing Alliance, and all these things. And I was in a gaming group from that. And I learned how to make websites through that. I was making websites at age 13, and that ended up being what I do professionally. And it's just kind of case in point, let something that is maybe an inspiration turn into something bigger, just by putting yourself into it, just throwing yourself into it.
And you have done, well, you say you're not artistic, you have done sculpting, you have done painting. There's a photograph here of you sculpting, I think. Is that right? So you have
So
Salacious Crumb, for example.
I did a little bit of sculpting in high school, and then when I was alone in Delaware and kind of lost my friends, and my wife was doing her studies and whatnot, I had a lot of free time, and so I'm like, I'm gonna get some clay, and I'm gonna just play with it. And so I think that head sculpt I did of Salacious took me, I don't know, a couple of months that I just picked at it. I watched a bunch of YouTube videos. I was subscribing to that Stan Winston school of and learning some sculpting techniques and all that. And it took a while to figure that out. But the good thing about Aliens is it's not like a human face. You have a little bit of play with it. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it still looks the part, and so. I mean, a lot of your guys that do 3D modeling might be surprised. That's like the same part of your brain, it feels like. If you especially now that we're in quarantine, if you get a block of clay and play with it, you might be surprised at what you can do with it. And 3D modeling, on the other hand, for me, it's impossible to do the organic stuff in that world. Everything from, and I do a lot of 3D modeling now, but it's all geometric stuff, and and so if you ever want to go into like that alien world, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the guys that now are doing 3D modeling might find they have that skill set.
Yeah, it's two distinct skills, isn't it? The sculpting. I have done a little bit of sculpting in some of the soft surface stuff, but it is quite completely different. So this is your finish, Salacious Crumb.
Yeah. So that was a cool project because. Again, it's something I've never done before, and as far as the prop building aspect, there was also kind of this puppetry thing with it. And so, I made like a stone mold for that. I modeled it in monster clay, and then I made this stone mold for it, and I got a latex cast out of it, and I punched the hair, and I made this puppet, and his ears worked, and I had like a sound box in him, and he'd laugh at people, and I'd go around conventions with him on a pillow, and he'd laugh at everyone. And And it was a great, like, I got such a better response to him than any costume I was in. And I got to meet Kirk Thatcher, who worked on the puppet, and Tim Robbins, who puppeteered him, and some other people that worked on the puppet. And so at Star Wars Celebration, and it was just a really great experience. And I ended up making 3 of those puppets just from the same mold, and sold a few. One of them actually was purchased by Carl Cunningham, who is now notorious for stealing a bunch of money from Rancho Obi-Wan. But
oh, really? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and so I don't know where the puppets are now, but I've still got one. Unfortunately, they're latex, so like over the years they start to deteriorate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's silicon nowadays, isn't it? That's the material to use.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, you've done some pretty spectacular builds. Out of everything that you've done, what's your most memorable and what's your favourite builds? And also, I mean, share some of the pain to it as well. What's some of the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, so I really like the quick builds, because the bigger ones I kind of obsess over for a number of months, and by the time I'm done with them, I want nothing to do with them. I guess one of my favorite would be I had a Bith costume, like a Cantina band. I didn't make the head. I bought it from a guy named Woodman on the forums. I don't know his real name. But I made a clue horn for that, like the instrument he plays. And it was like a weekend project where I sort of, again, the hardware store build of this thing, and I put a little MP3 player in it and made some MP3s that played all these different songs from like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. And then I went out, when we went to Star Wars Celebration, I busked on the street. I had like a suitcase with a cardboard sign, some alien language with like alien currency in it. And I busked on the street and made like $20 in the front of a coffee store. And so I like that kind of project. But lately I've been doing a lot of 3D modeling projects, which are like I think of the 3D printer kind of as a tool in my garage. And so, I'll buy big pieces of PVC and I'll get dowels and all that, and I'll find the hardware, and then I'll sort of model the parts around that physical stuff I have, which for me is a much easier way to approach a lot of this. And so I did some like we did the speeder bike project, which was a local 501st group. It was a build that was probably 15 or 20 people. And I modeled a lot of them. Yeah. And so they made the buck sort of out of foam and then fiberglassed over that. And so I would take all the measurements and do all sort of the intricate greebly parts of that, like the handlebars and the control panel and the engines and all that. And at the time I had a CNC, like a CNC router machine that helped me do a lot of that. So I'd started as a 3D model, and then I'd turn that into plywood and piece it all together with 3D printed bits and stuff. Yeah. So those are probably some. As far as challenges go, learning a lot of this stuff is very difficult. The 3D modeling stuff is just really hard to get into, and there's a lot of different programs out there. Some are really simple, but for me they were complicated, and so I probably played around with, I don't know, 10 or 12 different 3D modeling applications before I found one that worked for me. It's really obscure. I use something called Design Spark Mechanical.
Okay.
This is also called Space Claim. But I played around with like 123D and Blender and a bunch, and I really struggled with finding the right program. And once I did, I don't know what it was, that particular one clicked for me, and it's been really enjoyable now. But
I was a massive fan of 123D design, and then when they decided they weren't going to support it anymore, it was horrible. It's a real love-hate with Fusion 360. So I kept picking it up and then throwing it across the room and then picking it up again. But I kept going really because I didn't have any other choice. But yeah, 123D design was one of my favorites.
Yeah, but I guess I'd just encourage people to just shop around. If it's something they're not good at or they're having trouble with, try it in another place.
And going back to Astromechs, you've also made a few cool gadgets and a few kind of additions you've contributed on those sort of builds.
Yeah, and again, that's sort of going back to how the printer really hasn't, like, I wouldn't think conceptually like you do, printing a droid from the bottom up, just because of my background started in a different place, and I see the great application of that. And so the builds I'd seen that I grew up with were these Centaframe wood frame droids, and that's kind of where I started. And then I tried to take the experience I had with mechanisms and 3D printing and sort of pushed it into that world and tried to think of it without necessarily building on what other builders would do, but just look at it with a new state of mind of where does 3D printing and rapid prototyping fit into this sort of world. And like I said, I had the CNC machine, and so I did the frames and started to kind of reconsider parts of the frame and the drives and things like that, and found some quick ways to put them together. And so I had molds for feet. I used a lot of your files actually to make silicone molds, which I use for like my foot shells and then a lot of the greeblies on the body and stuff like that. And so when I had the molds, I invited a lot of my local friends to, hey, maybe this is something you want to try. And so for a while there, we had like a full-blown droid workshop in my garage. We were, I think at one point we had 6 or 7 droids being made, and so, yeah. But I started really tinkering with mine and trying more of the mechanical stuff. And so in that, I started figuring out slide mechanisms and things like that I could 3D print parts for, so that they worked better. And yeah.
Is that your R2 and the R5 in the middle then?
Yeah, the R2 was the one I built first. I helped a buddy of mine. I had it at the time. It was kind of a financially difficult project for me, and so I had a friend of mine that's always wanted R2D2, and so I'm like, well, I've always wanted to build R2D2. So he kind of started buying the parts and getting the wood, and then we had an agreement where he kind of bought 2 of everything, and then he funded my molds and stuff like that. And so by the end of it, I'd had an R2 completely built for him, and then I started my my R5 and with all the stuff that I'd accumulated from that build. And yeah, sort of a version 2. So I learned from that at the first one, and then was able to shove a bunch of gadgetry and whatnot into mine.
Your R5 is completely fully loaded, isn't it?
Yeah. So he's got a buzz saw and a zapper. I used Douglas Vickert's tutorial on making the zapper actually zap, and then I used some of your gadgetry, the gripper arm and the interface arm, and I just sort of made a 3D mount for those to fit into the Centaframe. I made a little buzz saw with like a quadcopter motor, and he's got the bad motivator that blows up and smokes, and a little light form scanner, and then he hands out trading cards. And then my trademark is he lays eggs, which I think he's the only droid now that lays eggs. And so I buy all these plastic eggs. I'll buy like hundreds of plastic eggs, and then I load them full of Lego R5D4s, and then he'll just he can hold 7 eggs in them, and then he'll spit out an egg, and he makes the little raspberry noise when he does it, and the kids pick up the egg, and then there's like, oh my gosh, there's a little baby one inside, and it's been really that's by far my favorite.
That's your favorite gadget then, really?
Yeah, and then I did a trading card dispenser. I'd seen that done before, and so I tried.
Is that this one here?
Yeah, that's it. And so I tried some ways of dispensing the card. I had compressed air, and I had a wheel on top with a spring, and I struggled a bunch with it. And then I finally found this mechanism with a belt and a little hook on it that would spit the card out, and that seemed to work enough, and consistently enough to where I just refined that. And then that's one part I'm providing to the club, but I'm having a lot of trouble keeping up with making them, just because it takes me a couple hours to put one together. And and then I started making the magnetic connectors, the mag tags, that I think I've sold over 600.
Yeah. Wow. They're for the dome, aren't they? That just carry the power through on the dome.
Yeah, so most people use it for disconnecting their dome. Now they're using it a lot on the sort of cabin home frames for removing the front and back skins, and so I've got a number of versions of that magnetic connector. And that project started just out of when I was working on that R2. I had to keep taking the dome off to test it, and I had a couple plug systems that were just really frustrating, and I was always working alone, and so I had the CNC router right there, and so I cut out a little circuit board, and I found a little spring connector, and I made my first prototype, and then I'm like, I think this is something that'll work. So and then I started sourcing parts and making some more complicated connectors. So that's been a great side hustle, I guess. I mean, I don't make a lot of money on it, but I make enough to kind of go back into my projects like this, from that, which is yeah. And it's one of those projects that's not Star Wars, so it's not licensed, and it's my creative thing, so I can kind of get away with that if I want to.
And of course, how would you pronounce it? Dejarik table.
Yeah, Dejarik. That's what I call it.
Yeah. So how did that start? Because obviously you've put together a whole suite of things for that.
Yeah, so that was kind of when we first moved to Washington. That was another story. I had no friends. I was home alone. I was looking for like a long-term project, and I'd done a little bit of the sculpting with Salacious and some other little things. And so I had this book called Star Wars Chronicles, and it's got like really detailed shots of some of the original props. And they had this 2-page spread that was just the holochess monsters, and there were 8 of them, and they were all extremely detailed monsters. And I'm thinking these things are on screen for less than 10 seconds, and there's so much detail in them, and so I thought it was really kind of a fascinating project. And so I looked on at the time, the replica prop forum was real big, and no one had really done a full set of monsters. People had started sculpting them but hadn't really finished the set, and so there were a lot of big collectors that wanted the monsters for their tables and whatnot. And so I just started sculpting one a month, and I quickly got 12 pretty serious collectors that were purchasing them every month when I finished one. And I had some of them sent me some reference material that they weren't supposed to give me, and so I was able to use that to have some good reference. And this was before The Force Awakens, so we had no idea that Dejarik was going to be coming back. It was just that scene from A New Hope. And so my reference was really limited. And so that really took off. Steve Sansweet ended up with a set of my monsters. He brought a couple of them to Celebration for his display, which was really cool for me. And then at the end of that project, I got contacted by a Disney Imagineer who wanted to purchase 3 sets of them, and I have no idea what happened to these. But I sent 2 to Florida and 1 to California, and so that was a really cool moment for me. And then toward the end of that project of just the monsters, I got a message from Frank Ippolito on my Facebook page, who'd seen my monsters and said, how cool they were and how close they were to the thing, how he'd got to handle the real stuff or whatever. And then the next month, here's the film coming out, and they're all there again, and they put them in stop motion and brought back Phil Tippett, and there's Frank Ippolito making the molds for them, So I was a little late to the project in that sense, because now all this reference was out, and they'd gone back to the original puppets, and there were just videos galore of these things, and I was already done. So.
Are they still in production at the moment?
No, I made 16 sets, and they were so much work. There's one guy, he's got 50 teeth on him, and I was rolling these little clay teeth and baking them in my oven, and then taking a pair of tweezers and dipping them in glue and gluing them in, and then I have to paint them all and make their little clothes and what. So I was just so done with it by the time I was done with those 16 sets. I don't know what 16 times 8 is, but that's how many of those things I made. So.
So they weren't resin or molds. You handmade a lot of the parts.
Yeah, so they all started in clay, and then I'd make a a mold, and I'd usually split them apart into a bunch of pieces, and then I make a silicone mold of like a hand or whatever, and then I had these like dental hygiene injectors. I'd inject the resin into them, and then some of them were too top heavy, so I made like a little rotocast machine, and I'd rotocast the head so that he doesn't want to tip over, and then some of them had joints, and they were either magnetic or ball joint, and so yeah, they were involved.
Yeah, it's quite difficult going when you have to go on full on production for these things, isn't it? Really, there's a lot of work involved.
And again, now there's I think there's 3 sets of hollow chest monsters that you can just 3D print at home. So I wish back then I was in that world, because I could have just churned those things out on my SLA printer. And anyway.
Yeah, but it's remarkable, really. And you've now got full design for the table, and I also understand it's a playable game as well. So you've worked with a few guys to put together the rules and the dice, etc.
Yeah, so when I was done with the monsters, I was like, well, I need something to put them on. I need a table to put them on. So I started looking at the table, and the table was it has a lot of things going on. It's got like 52 buttons and knobs on them, and you're wondering in the movie, like, how are they playing that game on this keyboard, and so I kind of liked the thought of, hey, let's see if we can reverse engineer this and turn the table into like a playable thing, and so that's when I really started using my printer. I modeled and printed out like a half of the table, and then I cast that in fiberglass, and then I started making printed key trays and making PCBs, and so I made this functional table. And then we found rules on the internet written by a guy named Mike Kelly. I don't know who he is, but they've been floating around on the internet forever. And that's the original rules I made my table to play. And then when we actually started playing it, we started noticing issues with it, and so we kind of altered a lot of the rules. And my brother and I made sort of a rule book that went along with it, and he illustrated it, and then from there I just liked sort of the board game aspect of it, and that's when I started making little wooden versions of the game. And what's funny is these movies have been coming out, since this obsession started. And in Rogue One, they even had a scene with these guys playing Dejarik on the ground with these sort of big models on this, physical table. There was no electronics in it. And so I liked that whole concept of that being in the Star Wars world as a game that's played. That's when we made dice and things like that could go along with it.
So is this one of yours then?
Yeah, so I made that little version of, I wanted to look like they were hand carved out of bone or something like that. And then I made all these dice, and I gave that one to Steve Sansweet at a convention, and I've got the plans to make some more of them. But then shortly after that, Galaxy's Edge opens up, and they've got kind of the same thing. They had a wooden Dejarik table with,
Yeah, you decided not to go up against the mouse, then.
Yeah, just that seems to be a common theme.
Yeah. And this is a rule book that you and your brother put together.
Yeah, that's the rule me and my brother made. And they're based on Mike Kelly's rules, but we've made them some adjustments so it's more playable. And then I've got some instructions on how to play with the dice in there, and the dice are a 3D print you can download, and it's fun. So that's just something I threw in with the Dejarik Builders stuff. But
so, and how often do you still play? I mean, do you play a little bit or not?
We played when we had the full table, but just here and there. But now not so much. I sold the table a while ago, and so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you decided to build a Millennium Falcon around the table. Is that right?
Yeah. So that was more of the local 501st wanted some big props for their Star Wars experience room, and and so I had a local friend I'd made, and both of us started putting this thing together, and I just got obsessed. I found the blueprints from Empire, and started plotting the whole thing out and trying to make this full scale bench. And I was, there was a couple months of just insanity, and cutting all those foam pieces out and all the little lights and these little 3D printing housings for the lights. And then I wanted the sounds in the background and again, there wasn't a lot of really good reference of like the little ottoman and stuff like that. I remember they released this sort of like virtual reality setup before Force Awakens came out, where you could like be in the Falcon and look around. And I remember I put my little virtual reality thing on and look around and try and find all the details for the bench and replicate them in full scale. And now that the movies have come out, there's so much reference for that bench. And now you literally go to Galaxy's Edge and it's there and you can see it in person and take all the pictures you want. So that's another one where I was late to the game. But yeah, but that...
Does the Galaxy Edge one stack up? Is it accurate, or do you just walk around going, well, that's not right, that's not right?
No, I mean it's completely accurate to the new film. So they did make some pretty drastic changes to the bench and the table that you wouldn't. I mean, like the knobs are a different shape and the lights are a bit bigger and things like that. But the whole thing seems scaled down a little bit from what the original A New Hope bench was. But I don't know, and I'm sure they had resources that I definitely didn't have. So it's as accurate as can be now because it's in the film. So
have you seen you recently released an AR kind of animation version of it, or where you can kind of...
Yeah, so I had this. I guess now it seems like it's been a stupid idea, but I had this idea that I was going to, once I had the table and I had the game, I'm like, how cool would it be if you pressed a button and then in augmented reality, like the monster moved, and like at that point we've literally recreated Hollow Chess, and so I started like, and this was again kind of right before 3D printing was kind of getting big and all that, but they had photogrammetry where you could like take a bunch of pictures of something from a bunch of different angles, and then you plug it into some software and it spits out a 3D model, and it's usually a pretty ugly 3D model, but it's textured and it's got and so I took my monsters, I took a couple of them and I took hundreds of pictures of them, put them into this software, and it made little 3D model versions of them. And then I found some free software and I threw the models into that, and I made I had these little cards, and you throw them down on the table, and when you put your phone up to them, then the monsters would appear. And I put that out on the internet, and it went like viral over the weekend. It was like on IGN and CNET, and it was like man creates real Star Wars Hollow Chess or whatever, and it went all over. And then I had a guy in France that contacted me named Adrian, who was like, hey, you said you wanted to turn this into a game. I have a video game background, kind of. I can develop this sort of thing. So he helped me make it, but that turned into kind of a road I shouldn't have gone down because he was wanting to monetize it and license it. And me, I'm like, I want to release this stuff. I want everyone to have access to this. So it was, it kind of ended up being a big mess. And by the time I was done with it, I was financially involved. We had started this little company. We got flown down to Silicon Valley to some augmented reality company that was trying to buy it from us and all this stuff. And then it took all the fun out of it. And so I had these assets, these models, and these animations I'd paid for, and I'd kind of put together. So I thought, let's give these back to the group. And so this past week, I released like an augmented reality app where you can point it. It's just for Android devices, but you can point it at your full size table, and the monsters appear there, and they're animated, but you can't interact with them or anything. But it's probably as far as I'm going to go with it because I'm a little done with it.
Brilliant. I'm going to embarrass you now, Ian. So Michael McMaster, Ian is infinitely skilled, sculpting, woodwork, mold making, ... What do you think about that comment, Ian?
That's very kind from McMaster. No, yeah, honestly, he's been a huge influence for all of this. I mean, at that young age, he was what I wanted to be and the kind of builder I wanted to be. And so he even had me up to his orange farm for the weekend, and he had a C-3PO suit there I got to look at, and that really got me going in this. He's been a great influence in my life. I wish I kept that friendship up a little more. They're doing really cool things now, but he's been essential in my life, especially my early life, and when I didn't really understand the way friendships were supposed to work, maybe. But he actually filmed our wedding. If you can believe it, Michael.
Oh, really? Okay.
My wedding. He did a really great cut of my wedding that we watch every year. So
It is. It's yeah, and I mean that's one of the things about the community is that I guess there's people that you hold in kind of immense. You know, you put them on pedestals for what they actually do, and everybody is just lovely. They're sharing, they're helping, they're supporting. You know, they're all kind of doing exactly what we do around building, and it's so important, I guess, to keep all of that going.
Yeah, and it is, and it's funny jumping from state to state like we've done. We've run into so many really really incredible people, and it's hard keeping that going. I guess virtually now I need to be doing more of that, but we're all busy.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, I've got to ask you. Did you predict this current pandemic? And I only ask you because I believe your latest project was to build a pub in the garden, and that's showing quite a bit of foresight.
Yeah.
I'm great fan of what's it called? Oh God, what's it called? That film. We'll bugger off to the Winchester until it all blows over.
Yeah, we actually just had a buddy up last week that recreated that. He came over and recreated the Winchester.
Yeah, Sean Pegg.
Shaun of the Dead, yeah.
No, it's Shaun of the Dead, of course. Yeah, so Shaun of the Dead moment, you decided that the world is going to come to an end, so I need to build an English pub in my back garden. Is that right?
Yeah, it's kind of, sort of. So it's funny because I live in quarantine. My life is quarantine. Me and my wife both work from home.
Okay.
And so we'll go, over a week, and then we'll get in the car and we'll be like, oh my gosh, we haven't started the car in over a week. And so I'm completely used to this bizarre lifestyle of being completely isolated out in the middle of nowhere. And so when I sold that Falcon setup with the bench and the display, mostly because I built a shed. I put a shed in specifically for that bench, and it just filled the whole thing. And I brought it out like once or twice, and so I'm like, this is completely taking up space. So it's just one of those sessions that my wife just rolls her eyes and giggles at. And so when I got rid of that, I used the money I got from that. I donated whatever the local garrison had donated for the project back to the Children's Hospital, and then the rest of it, I framed this structure that was going to become our backyard pub, which we named the Falcon, based just because we'd sold the set for that. And it was because we didn't have a local pub, and the pub's always been sort of our happy place.
Okay.
And we wanted a place where when we were done working on our computers all day long, we could just kind of pretend like we're gone back 100 years. And so it was I literally finished it. Like I put the last windows in and the trim around the windows like a week before our state shut down. And
really?
So it's just been wonderful. It's like my own private pub, and I come out and pour my Guinness, and I've got Guinness on draft, and I've got a little peat fire behind me going right now, and it's just been absurd. So it's the best decision I ever made, that's for sure. And again, a completely a skill building project. I want to be able to work on the house, and I didn't have experience framing or building furniture or any of that. And so I just had this idea in my head, I'm going to do this thing that I probably can't do, and just saw it through to the end. And so it's just been extremely rewarding.
It looks absolutely magnificent, and I guess it's all quite I guess traditionally made.
I did what I could to not use the rapid, the CNC router for as much as I could. I used it for a lot of the circle thing. It's hard cutting a circle perfect, so I used it on my stools and some of the circular stained glass windows and stuff like that. But the rest of it I tried to use with traditional hand tools and things. I mean, power tools. I'm not like cutting everything with a handsaw.
Yeah. So you made the stools as well. Everything is fabricated by Ian.
Yeah, I tried to. I didn't want anything in there that I didn't make as far as I could muster. I mean, I bought a lot of the hardware and the lamps and things like that.
Wow. It's absolutely amazing. And most importantly, you've got Guinness on tap.
Yeah. I just put a urinal in the back. I don't think my HOA is watching right now, so they want to see it. But I took an old keg and carved it out and put a little urinal back there, and I've got a sleeping loft upstairs. It's a whole queen bed up there, and it's just been a really cool place.
And that's what it looks like. So once you've finished work, you can travel to the pub.
Go out to the pub, yeah.
Without leaving. Oh yeah, I tell you, there's a lot of people who need a pub in the back garden at the moment. I've got to say.
Yeah. So we've been having a lot of friends over. Like we just a couple weeks ago we had an event we called Bots and Beer, where so we had like 16 droid builders up here, and we just had a big kind of droid building, beer drinking kind of day, like you're proposing to do next Friday or Saturday. and we were out racing droids in the street, and it was a really great time. So I'm hoping we do that every year.
No, well, we'll see how it goes next weekend. The plan, I haven't really thought this through because you throw these things out very, very quickly. But Droid and Drinks, I think, is next Saturday. If we're going to try it via Zoom. If we've got lots of people on, then we might have to split off into Zoom groups rather than it being 100 people on video conference. It might get a bit crazy. So, but yeah, anybody who's got Zoom accounts who wants to host a group or whatever, then that'd be great. And I don't know where do we segment them into regions or whatever. I don't know how we do it, but I think it'd just be nice to drink, stare into a camera, and pretend that you've actually got a social life. That'd be quite good fun, actually. Oh, I know, fantastic. But yeah, I've got to say, hats off to you on the Falcon. It's absolutely magnificent. That.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're coming up to time, but I've got to ask you one last question. And of course, I think I'm supposed to these guys, but you can, of course, do the diplomatic answer. But Star Wars, we've got a new trilogy. We've got Disney Plus. We've got Mandalorian. We've got the Mouse. What's your view on it?
It's been interesting for me. I'm coming from this from a different perspective from a lot of you guys. So you've lived through this already with the prequel movies, and I was 12 years old when Episode 1 came out, so I didn't miss garbage. I was watching it and I had a great time. And then now I've slowly come to the realization that it's not really my cup of tea or whatever. And so I honestly feel like I'm wearing like a Make America Great hat right now. This is literally politics in this world. So,
Yep.
So I don't want to go too far into it. But I guess from that perspective now I'm seeing these as an adult, and it's affecting the nostalgia of my childhood. You know what I mean? It's like the stuff that's sort of sacred is now not sacred, and so you go back and you'd watch A New Hope and you'd think of little Annie when Darth Vader is coming onto the Tantive, and so I'm sure you've had the same experience. But now I'm having a similar sort of, now I go back and watch the films and they're not the same movies. You're thinking about all these things that have happened.
Yeah.
And they're making some decisions that are more toward a fan service without really thinking through them entirely. Like they did a scene in Solo of the Dejarik set again, and it's really cool because they had I guess when they originally made the puppet, the hollow chest puppets, they had 10 puppets, and 2 of them didn't make the cut. And Phil Tippett had these 2 puppets, and so they added those 2 monsters back into the Solo scene. So now there's 10 chess figures, and that was a cool sort of fan service moment. But from like a fan perspective, it's like, well, what do we do with 2 more monsters? There's already all these rules and these things around that. So that's kind of like the decisions that they've been making, and that's a small example, but have sort of, it's hard to grapple with sometimes for me. So there's some stuff I'm really looking forward to. I wish they didn't. They just kind of stayed away from the big moments we see we've come to love, and moved back toward the unexplored. And that's why The Mandalorian's been so great for me.
Yeah.
It's stuff like the cantina where it's like, oh, it's run by droids now because they used to not allow droids, whatever. I don't know how I feel about some of that stuff, but I'm really looking forward to the Obi-Wan series and stuff like that. I think a lot of it's been spot on, and I'm always up for a new, game or creature or whatever else. So it's been fun to watch. It's been a good ride.
I mean, I've said it a couple of times, but I mean, my view on it is with firstly, 50-year-old or 40-year-old or 30-year-old grumpy old men shouldn't judge science fiction films because it's that spirit that you capture when you're 8, 9, 10, 12. You will never recreate that moment. We all had those moments of films, and I mean, I loved all the new stuff. I guess my take on it is they all tried to be the Star Wars genre. and where they moved away from the Star Wars genre. So like Rogue One, was that kind of what they did. Mandalorian is, to take Star Wars into a spaghetti western with into a different genre really works. I know we've talked about Tarantino directing, or so if you can keep the universe but shift it to a different genre, I think it's quite exciting. I think where it hits the fans is where they try to recreate the old stuff. Really, that's quite a word.
I got this big argument with a cousin of mine the other day about how Star Wars wasn't sci-fi. He was telling me, Star Wars isn't really a sci-fi movie; it's a fantasy movie. And he was going into all these things about, how to be a sci-fi. It has to be based on real life, and it has to be sort of a future setting. But this is a long, long time ago. And so in that sense, I think Star Wars is kind of like a fairy tale. It's kind of like, the stories we grew up with that our parents would read to us. And so when they start, playing around with the fairy tale, things can get a little funny, and so it sort of triggers something in your head where it's like, that's not quite right. That's not the story I used to know.
Yeah.
And so I, that's kind of been my general feeling about all of it.
No, they've hit some good ones. Anyway, as you said, we'll see how Obi-Wan comes out. You may be a stunt extra, I guess, for McGregor in the background, according to some of the comments. But
I think that's one of the plans I have, actually. I've been doing the Mythos Obi-Wan costume where he's wandering in the desert. So I did that costume and did the backpack with all the bits on it, and he's got like the old Qui-Gon and Anakin's lightsaber hanging from his belt, and he's super badass, And what's funny is that's based on like the Sideshow Mythos Obi-Wan statue, which is like really, really cool.
Yeah,
and I did that costume, and then I got contacted by Sideshow, and they're like, hey, cool costume, let's send you some free stuff. And so they sent me some free stuff, and then a couple weeks later they're like, hey, would you mind being at our booth or something like that at Celebration? So I was Obi-Wan at Celebration and the Sideshow booth, and then they released that they were doing a new version of the Mythos Obi-Wan, like a 12-inch figure, and so it's just been so I've done the Obi-Wan thing, and so I'm thinking when the series comes out, I'll probably be going hardcore into that again.
So the beard's not going anywhere then.
I guess not. Yeah, and it's good because like I can't get my hair cut, and so it'll all be grown out by then.
Yeah, you need to build a hairdresser's in your back garden next to the pub.
Yeah, exactly.
You could get a little village, actually, couldn't you? So I think we're pretty much close to time now, so we'll start to wrap up. But a couple of questions. Cronus side, if all goes ahead, you still going to Celebration? Assuming that it's on.
I am hoping to. I really don't like missing the chances to hang out with the droid builders. I did DroidCon for the first time last year, or the year before last, and that was like one of the best times I had. And so I'm really enjoying the networking and the droid world aspect of all that. So I don't think I could miss it just for that purpose alone. And this might actually be the first year I can bring my droid down to Anaheim, because it's I don't know what it is, a number of hours, but we can actually probably drive the droids down there. So I'd love to have my droid there in the room for the first time. Cool. I don't think I'm going to be missing this one if it keeps going. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I'm the same. I've got the tickets and I've got the flights, assuming that the airline survives, which is a little bit iffy at the moment. But hey, we'll just grab another airline. If it's all on, I'll be there. So hopefully we get a chance to share a pint of Guinness here or two.
That would be
fantastic. And also, you got any plans for any other runs that you're about to do? Are you doing any more on the card dispensers, or are you doing around pubs? Can people order flat pack pubs for the back garden?
So no, not flat pack pubs. I feel like my wife's gonna kill me because I don't stop, and I'm always doing these big grand things, and this pub was just like the last straw, I think. So I need to settle down a little bit. So I've really been neglecting the Dejarik Builders Group. And I think I'm going to start working on some electronics aspects for that and trying to actually print a table. Like I said, my table wasn't actually a printed table, so I've released the plans, but I haven't made one myself. So I want to try it out and see how. So I think that's probably. I've been thinking about some other droids, like maybe the scrubber droids that was over here the last couple of weeks, and I was really excited. And then maybe a 39.1%er. That's been a lot of fun. So
yeah.
Anyway, but small scale stuff, you know.
Yeah, stuff you can fit in. That's the problem with Astromechs. They're very, very big to get in the car. Nothing like you guys in the US just make massive things. Everything we make large things, and you go right. You know, I'm just like masters. I'm just going to do the bottom half of a sandcrawler. You know, can't quite fit the top half in. It's oh my god, what is it with you Americans? You know, we make an R2. Look at this R2D2 is quite big for what we do. So.
Well, didn't James Bruton like print like a house-sized statue of himself or something?
He did. Okay. Yeah. I'll give you that. And he did the Transformers one as well. He did the what's the yellow one in the car called?
Yeah, Bumblebee. Yeah.
Bumblebee. Yeah, he did do a Transformers Bumblebee. But yeah, okay. We have some lunatics. We're just not all lunatics like you guys. Anyway, I've got to say, Ian, a huge thank you for joining us. Massive thank you for the community. I think you are. You're one of those gentlemen, and I guess that in 10, 15 years' time, people will be referring to you like you referred to Mike Masters, of inspiring them, supporting them, helping them, or whatever. So, long may it continue, my friend.
Well, thanks for having me. I was shocked when you reached out to me, so it's been loads of fun. So.
Yeah, well, we just stumbled across the odd thing that you've done, like the pub and the full-size Millennium Falcon and the speeder bike and whatever. So yeah, I think it's more than worthy. Okay, right. So thank you very much. Next weekend, hopefully planned, we're having Droid Builders drinks. I think we'll probably
even if it's again like 9 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to be there with my Guinness. So
it is. I don't care. So we'll do it probably about we start drinking at about lunchtime in the UK. But that means you guys would have to get up really, really early, which isn't fair. So if we aim at about 6 or 7 o'clock ish, and then it'll be 10, 11 o'clock. You've not got to have 10 pints. You can just have 5.
Yeah,
that'll be okay.
Time, I'm sure. Yeah.
You've not got far to stagger to get home, so you'll be okay. I'm sure. If not, you can just sleep in the pub. You've got a darts table behind you, from what I can see as well, which is a darts table, darts board. Cool. Right. Anyway, I will leave you all in peace. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks again, Ian. And take care. Everybody stay safe. Stay isolated. Keep printing droids. Keep making stuff. Pretend you're working. And we'll no doubt see everybody next week. That's fantastic. Thank you. Bye.